Roberto Requejo. I'm the executive director of Elevated Chicago, and we are a coalition of 15 community-based organizations and institutions advancing equitable transit-oriented development in Chicago. And before I tell you more, let me tell you how happy I am that this is not a Zoom call. So, with that said, I think it's, there you go. This image here shows you what equitable transit-oriented development looks like. It looks like diversity. Diversity of housing options, diversity of businesses, diversity of services, diversity of community spaces, all in close proximity to transit, all of them walkable, and all of them easy to reach through a variety of transportations. And what distinguishes ETOD from traditional transit-oriented development that you see all around Chicago is that ETOD, the E in ETOD means that we center a racial and social equity in everything we do. We avoid displacing existing residents and businesses. We engage communities meaningfully and authentically. And in a nutshell, what equitable transit-oriented development is developing neighborhoods not for, not to, but with communities. Since 2017, we have provided capital grants and loans for bricks and mortar near transit. We have funded supporting programming near transit stations. We have advocated for policy and systems change. And we have spread the word about ETOD through media, through social media, through data and research, and through events like today's. So let me start this conversation by asking all of you who have lived in a multifamily building, either yourselves or a loved one, to raise your hand. And I'm going to show you some examples of what that looks like here. So 2-flat, 3-flat, mid-rise, high-rise, courtyard building, all these lovely places. Now, raise your hand again if you or your loved one used transit while you were living in this type of building. Great. So let me tell you all that all of you are very lucky, and your loved one is very lucky, because believe it or not, that type of building is banned, is prohibited near CTA stations across Chicago. So our zoning code is the problem, and our zoning code is a challenge I'm bringing today. It prohibits 2 and 3 flats and anything bigger in walking distance to more than 30 CTA stations, preventing thousands of families in Chicago from enjoying affordable housing and transportation. And here are some examples from the brown line and from the blue line. So what you can see here is a number of circles. Those circles represent a quarter-mile radius near a number of CTA stations. And those are stations where within that circle you cannot build any kind of multifamily housing, or the vast majority of the circle doesn't allow for that type of development. In addition to those 30 stations, many others don't allow multifamily development in portions of that circle. So this is pervasive across Chicago. And do you know what is allowed near transit in Chicago, though? This is allowed near transit. Car dealers, body shops, drive-thrus, gas stations. That is easy to build near transit. And so not only our zoning excludes many types of housing near transit, it allows car-oriented uses in areas that should be all about promoting public transportation, as Leah was mentioning earlier today. So how do we move from a city for cars to a city for people? The answer is through our zoning code. Here are some of the key obstacles, though, and all of these are connected to each other. And all of these challenges you can help us with. First, while the mayor's office and city departments are supportive of changing our zoning code, thank you, Kyra, thank you, Juan Sebastian, from the mayor's office and city departments, as I mentioned, we need a majority of our aldermen and alderwomen to support a change in the zoning code. We have 50 of them. Many are supportive. Many are indifferent, and some are not so crazy about the change. The other obstacle that we have is it's an obscure topic. Nobody wakes up every morning wanting to hear about zoning, right? So how we tell interesting stories about zoning, how can we make them accessible and engaging? Third obstacle is inertia and resistance to change. We have had this type of zoning for over 50 years. For many residents, this is all they know. They have gotten accustomed to this or resigned to depend exclusively on a car. And many of them, they depend on a car to do all their work and move around. And finally, there is NIMBYism, or not in my backyard. A lot of people don't want multifamily housing in their backyard. Some residents in Chicago believe that multifamily housing destroys property values, community character, overtaxes schools and traffic, or brings undesirable people to their community. These beliefs have all been proved untrue and are often based on racist and classist assumptions, but in spite of all the data and the research, you all know how hard it is these days for the truth to shine through. So now you may be wondering, why do we care so much about zoning and ETOD? And in a nutshell, what I'll say is that when you prevent people from living near transit, you're hitting Chicago where it hurts us the most. You're weakening our city's racial equity, the economic stability of our families, our public health indicators, and our resilience to climate change. And here are some data points. I'm not going to read all of them, but as you can see here, the percentage of black households without a car is 3 times larger than white households without a car. Families who live near transit save up to 23% in housing and transportation costs. Access to transit is directly correlated to better indicators in health, both mental and physical, and yes, also COVID-19 related health, higher vaccination rates in transit-rich communities, lower incidence of COVID-19. And finally, TOD offsets up to 30% of household-based greenhouse emissions. I could go on and on about why this is important. So when we created Elevated Chicago, we knew that ETOD could address all these crises. What we didn't know is how these 4 things were going to come together and converge tragically in 2020. And now more than ever, we are convinced that there is no equitable recovery for Chicago without equitable transit-oriented development. So this is my final statement. Regarding mobility and transportation, to achieve Chicago's carbon and equity goals, a critical obstacle for Elevated Chicago and for the city is to change our current zoning laws. They have created communities that are segregated, they are car dependent, and they are not walkable. And we need a new code that incentivizes a diversity of development near transit. Thank you.